The global economy is moving toward recovery from the pandemic, but an uneven one. Now, that's the conclusion of a new report from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. A number of factors are making the difference, and they include vaccine development, better treatments for COVID patients, and an unprecedented level of government and central bank actions to stabilize markets. Of course, challenges remain, among them a battered labor market and difficult bottom lines for corporations and businesses around the world. Still, the OECD believes that the worst has been avoided and that economies will revive with growing pace. Economists there predict that global output will reach pre-pandemic levels by the end of 2021, with GDP rising by over 4%. The U.S. and Europe will likely see a similar expansion. And China and India, meanwhile, are likely to grow at even faster pace in the next 2 years. Meanwhile, South Africa is likely to see a slower expansion, but with signs still pointing to recovery. Now, earlier I spoke to Laurence Boone. She's chief economist at the OECD, and I asked her if the worst was over for the world's economies.
So we're still in the midst of the pandemic, as many of us are still feeling it. But with vaccines in sight, as you were highlighting, there's hope for a better future. Now, what policymakers have to do, what we have to do, is really to bridge the gap between now and the time towards the end of 2021, where the vaccines will have been widely deployed and there's hope that life can return to something that is more normal.
You write in this report that within individual economies, not all groups will recover equally. Who is at risk of being left behind?
So that's absolutely right. As you know and as you explain, it's very important, and the economic performance of each country depends on how efficient health policy has been and how efficient as well the efficacy of the public support. The public support's been super good for helping firms, for helping workers, but there's obviously people who are left behind, such as the low qualified people, because they're mostly into the sectors which require contact. They are the young people arriving on the labor market. It's super difficult to enter the labor market in the wake of the crisis. We saw that in 2010 with the financial crisis. And also the children from deprived neighborhoods. We have seen how much of them did not manage to keep on with the education system during confinement. So there will be a lot of work to do to help all those people, the workers and the kids, get a better start once the pandemic once the pandemic is over, but also throughout this period.
You mentioned public support there. That varies between economies, and I'm thinking especially of the U.S. and Europe. What's been the biggest difference between those two regions during this pandemic?
So there's been a number of differences, and as you rightly noted, it's mostly in 2020. First, Europe was affected first by the virus, where we knew very little. So there was a very strict confinement in Europe compared with what happened in the US. And I think that's the main difference for 2020. The situation, if you were looking at some specific states in the US, would be different. So that's one thing. The other is obviously the extent of the support. I think it has been very large on both sides of the Atlantic. So that is really helping in an equal fashion, I would say, what's happening. In Europe, however, the job retention scheme, the tradition of which comes from Germany and the Kurzarbeit, has really protected people who have a job. In the US, it has been more uncertain. There was huge support in the first half of this year. The government wrote checks to people, but now this is very uncertain with the change of government, and that is putting some strain on people. So I would say, roughly, the economic performance we expect for 21 is about the same, but the way people are affected is quite different.
All right, Laurence Boone, chief economist for the OECD. Thank you very much.